Well, hello everyone. How are you doing Thursday afternoon, noon, evening, Friday morning, maybe? Fantastic day here in Colorado. Just been jamming out to a little of Creedence Clearwater Revival. And yeah, a little Born on the Bayou there for you. It's always been one of my secret fantasies to actually go out and be a DJ for the day. Hello, all the wonderful people here. Free thinkers. Claudette, good to see you. Sherry, good to see you. And hold on one second. I'm going to do something here. Give me 1 second. And there we go. So, how are you doing? Hope everyone's doing. Listen, I want to give a big shout out to Skywalker777, lives in South Africa, and the insanity that's taking place there. You know, our thoughts are with you, and send positive energy. That's just very sad. I think that our species still has not learned anything, in spite of all the religion, politics, culture, lack thereof. Yet we seem to be forever stuck in this sick insanity of killing one another, finding prejudice in one another, and looking upon others as though that they are somehow beneath us. You know, it's just a whole mind trip all the way across. And hey, Reverend Wolf, how are you doing? Haven't seen you in a while. Laura, good to see you. Hey, Brian, how you doing? Melanie, good to see you. PG, darling, good to see you. So we just in that whole area there, you know, and in South Africa, it's not the only place, but it's the one where you just, you know, and when I think about this, particularly in the reading that we're doing right now, you know, that is, until we find something older, is in fact the birthplace of Homo sapiens. We went from the time of Homo erectus and made this huge evolutionary jump, and I guess something we just haven't figured out, something flawed in there. Listen, I also want to say that I think it's great. Great comments. I mean, thank you, all of you, for sending what are just most encouraging emails. You always have a few. You know, Ricky Nelson said it best at the garden party. You can't please everybody, so you've got to learn to please yourself. And that's true. You were not put on this planet to fulfill someone else's expectations or perceptions of their reality, and neither was I. And it has to be known that we have to, well, somehow be more tolerant. Yeah. So, quest to the unknown, Mr. Natural. To those of you who know Mr. Natural, I salute you. To those of you who were not born then, too bad for you. And for those of you that were born then and you didn't get to know, well, you missed out. So, we're going to be talking about angels today. So, it's a subject that I have a lot of books in my library. This is one that I thought was pretty interesting. Gustav, I like this. Gustav Davidson. Interesting take. You know, the problem when you start studying angels and the whole angelology, the mythos behind it, is it's very hard to get the dye out of the religious, how shall we say, connotones. Yeah, they're everywhere, and that sucks. Excuse me a second here. This thing got, I don't know why it does that. Another good one is, I think I found this one. Stephen Quayle does some pretty interesting books. Again, caught up in the Christian mythos, but nevertheless, some good books on this. There's others in there that we'll be bringing up. Again, if you have the Nag Hammadi, it's written extensively. Our reading on this part is going to be interesting because I will take a bet and I like playing roulette. In Vegas, I do very good at that. And I would put a serious bet that maybe not so much in the viewers that are watching, because most people here are free thinkers. We have some that, are still learning, but the vast majority believe angels from a Christian biblical perspective. And they somehow see that these are spiritual beings. I did for the longest time until I began to realize that we were taught wrong. And, listen, folks, it's funny when I see people write comments. I actually had one woman write this. If you would just read your Bible a little bit more and just study it a little bit more, you will find where you're in error in all this. And I go, really? Okay. I don't know that, at least I haven't met personally in my life too many other people besides my wife that are as ferocious readers as we are. She laughed when she found out when I told everyone she had actually put me on timeout and buying books. But that's okay. So I'm going to have some, as Sheldon Cooper says, a hot beverage. Hello, Edna. How are you doing? Good to see you. Tim, good to see you. So we're going to study today about angels, how we have missed this. Oh my goodness. And some people will accept it, some people won't. We're going to be seeing from actually using the Old Testament, Abraham, Lot, Sodom. There's a Freudian slip. And the destroyer. And this last part, I encourage you all to stay to the end. When you read the proper interpretation, well, Edna, don't go around telling everyone that, that who the destroyer truly is, might make you want to think twice about this so-called God that so many people worship. All right, without ado, time is upon us. We cannot stop the hands, although I do like that one song back in the 60s. If I could turn back the hands of time, oh, darling. Yep, yeah, I dig the music, folks. I truly do. So let me get everything up here so I won't have this interrupting me anymore. And I think you folks are really going to enjoy this. So angels, according to the Hebrew, are maklahims. Did you get that? Maklahims. It took me a long time how to go, that thing going there. But anyway, thank you, Lisa. Much has been written about these figures. However, the only certainty that the term angel comes from is the Greek. And in the Greek, it's called angelos, which means messenger, herald, correspondent. The traditional religious literature follows the Holy Scriptures, wherein they are described as intelligent beings, superior to men, and subordinate to God. They are also often called sons of God, inhabitants of the sky. And again, we have to take off your glasses of your Christian or your religious background. You got to put that aside. You use that merely as a hard drive does. You just simply partition it off and you access it as you need it. because you want to keep as much memory open so that this can have an opportunity to be stored. The religious tradition itself equates them to various figures described in different stories. The Sumerians, the Anunnaki, the Greeks, demons, the Romans, the Genii, and the Zoroastrians, the spirits. And I know I screwed that up. I always do. In the Old Testament, these figures are already presented at the beginning of human life and make their appearance as guardians of Eden after the expulsion of the first humans, Genesis 3:24. They are also present, again, as Elohim's messengers, again, plural, in many events of the history of the people of Israel. They are involved in helping Hagar, Abraham's servant. They introduce themselves to Abraham and his nephew Lot, and the angels precedes the people of Israel during the pilgrimage in the desert. And other religions have them, the Quran has them. The Hindu Vedic has it. I mean, it's replete through our species. We've seen these beings, and, it's just a matter as to which pair of glasses you're viewing as to what your take is. In any case, however, they are described as concrete individuals. Now, remember, the term concrete here means material, substance, not woo, flesh, blood. All right? Very human in the way they themselves manifest and behave with biblical protagonists whom they have been sent to perform a specific task. We do not want to make a compendium of angelology as it has developed over the centuries, since there is already vast literature on it. We only want to provide the reader with some basic concepts useful to understand the difference between real literal texts and the missive conceptual hoarding that religion has superimposed. The manipulation began in the so-called post-exile period. That is, after the Jewish people were exiled by Nebuchadnezzar II in the early 6th century BC, and the subsequent preeminence in the territory of Babylon with the resulting cultural contaminations. And this is very important. If you are really seeking, listen, I studied that Bible for longer than many people of our listeners that are alive. And the problem is like anything else. It's like riding a stationary bicycle. You can travel 1,000 miles, but you go nowhere. That's the problem. We have already said that the names in Greek and Hebrew, Agelos and what we call the Mahalach, define the function and not the essence of these figures. And this, in our view, has a very simple and straightforward explanation. The authors of the text did not feel the need to analyze their nature because it was blatant and obvious to all. These were similar humans and thus did not require any sort of speculation. We'll go deeper into this by presenting some stories in their literal version. To go back to the little angelology we were doing, the conceptualization of a spiritual world divided into various hierarchies reveals the influence of Mesopotamian and Persian influence, not Hebrew. I think it's so important if you're a study of anthropology of the different races. The Hebrews borrowed from their cousins, their aunts, their uncles, and it adapted it into their own ideology, just like today with Christianity. You see, this is something I know, folks. Christianity today, you know how many schisms? I'll go back and look at the chat room later, but does anyone have a guess how many schisms? And what is a schism? A schism is a division. Going your way, I'm going to go my way. The Great Schism started in 1514 with the Protestant Reformation. Today, the Christian religion is so fractured, over 30,000 different denominations. Now, if you tell me they're all praying to the same God, I'll take you on that. You come on this show and you tell me how that is the same God. Because you and I will have a honest, intellectual debate. Let's continue. Once in and let me just digress here as well. You have to understand, when Nebuchadnezzar took the Israelites, not the Jews, the Israelites, captivity, he did the same thing the Romans did. Stripped them of their culture, their heritage. And when Nebuchadnezzar came in, the Israelis, the Israelites were already a fractured people. Many had quit believing in their God. Many of them didn't even know the name of the God. And in fact, that's the greatest mystery, because that name was lost. No human alive, it's never been written, knows the real name of their deity. So they get taken into Babylon. Now, let me set the scene for those of you who don't know. This is actual history, not religiosity, history. And let me just say this as well. Nebuchadnezzar was a smart guy. He took the elite. He let the ignorant, the serfs, the uneducated in Palestine. He didn't need them, didn't want them. They were a burden. What he wanted was the educated, the elite, the sophisticated, the wealthy. The wealthy had already gotten out. They knew in advance. Most of them headed out to Alexandria, and that's where they wrote out this whole period. And so as these Israelites that are now captive are being led into what is modern day Iraq, lo and behold, 200 miles before, that's what it was said that they could be seen, they saw this huge white Ephesus. Huge, could be seen for days and days. It was the Tower of Babel. And so during that time, they lost their religion, had to reinvent it, and this is what they drew upon. The Jewish thought develops its doctrine using a symbolism that was alien to its original cultures, used to systemize its own representation of the angelic world. Also, later commentators, and then the whole Christian tradition, had the need to make these figures coherent with the vision of the spiritual and transcendent monotheistic God. Thus, interpreters in Egypt, the theologians and church fathers believed that they could not prevent the providing a description of these figures. Therefore, they said and wrote about them as spiritual beings with no material body, who take visible appearance only when needed, that they only appear, eat, or walk, but never are real, who are only employed as intermediaries, if necessary, by gods for punishment or help. The description provided by the Bible led away to the need to assign a certain corporeity, the corporeal form. And thus, they have also been described as having a sort of ethereal, airy, fiery body. There was then the plethora of hypotheses, with the church decided to stop in the Fourth Lateran Council, 1215, by establishing once and for all the spiritual essence of these beings. So let's just step back here. Wild speculation, theories, hypotheses, running rampant in the church, and this is the Vatican. This is not the Protestant. Remember, you Protestants are as much Catholic as you're Protestant. You can't separate the two. By establishing, they had to stop this, because you have to see throughout all Europe, the stories were abounding. Demons, angels, paintings, as you can see, of that era. And it was getting crazy. So what they did is that they did it. They divided into 9 choirs cherubim, seraphim, thrones, virtues, powers, dominions, principalities, archangels, and angels, and distributed into three hierarchies. But then we have to wonder, does all this match up with the figures of the Elohim's messengers described in the Old Testament? No. Are we sure that this view corresponds to what the text tells about the events that occurred to the atoms in those historical periods when they were still in close contact with God and his angels? True to our commitment, we are now going to read what those texts tell about ancient times. We will literally present those texts here prior to any manipulation or post-exile influence. This is so important. Everything that we believe in our culture today was set in the seeds of yesterday. Zechariah and the Malachim. In our exemplification of how angels are truly represented in the Old Testament, we now quote a very curious, brief excerpt from the book of the prophet Zechariah, which we will later examine more extensively in order to observe some absolutely interesting visions, which are rarely, indeed, almost never surveyed. In the first chapter of this ambiguous book, the prophet tells us of his vision during which he listens to a dialogue between a man in a deep ravine on a bay horse amid some myrtles and others standing behind him, also amidst the myrtles. A first curiosity is found in chapter 1, verse 10. This character is described as a man, therefore an individual of flesh and bones. But in the following verse, when the other men talk to him, he is referred to as angel. And they answer to the angel of Yahweh, the one standing in between the myrtles. In the second chapter, the situation becomes more dynamic. And Zechariah says in 2:7, and here is the angel speaking with me, is coming out, and another angel is coming out to meet him. The second messenger orders the former to give the young prophet information concerning Jerusalem. But the way he invites him to do so is definitely not that spiritual. Indeed, the order is run, talk to the young man. In the brief passage, we notice once again the obviously need for the narrator to give a precise description of place and situation. It's in a deep valley, in the field of myrtle, and this Malach standing among the bushes, from where he later comes out, and the second Malach that does the same to meet the former and invites him to run and talk to the young man. Thus, unavoidable questions arise. If it was not a description of a real scene, why did the narrator repeatedly stress the fact that the Malach was a mist in between within the bushes of the myrtle? Why did he have to make the two Malachims move to allow them to talk to him? Why on earth should a spirit tell another to run to talk to someone? It is difficult to ignore the concreteness of the protagonist's actions, whose physical location and movements in the scene are hardly likely to be spiritually interpreted, a spirituality that certainly did not belong to the author of the text. I tried to explain this to people before. Folks, there is no Lucifer. It's not in the Bible. Now, you are going to point to me in the book of Isaiah 14, but do your studying. You will know what happened with Saint Bernard of the, well, actually, I can give you the exact date. Roughly about 475 to 425. He was in the caves of Caesarea, and by his own admission, put Lucifer in there when it had no being at all. This is how myths become religions and facts that people will give their very life because they believe in them. And when you die, you get the biggest shock of your whole entire existence. Anyway, Abraham, the Lord, and the Malachim. We now analyze a story in which the Malachims are the protagonist. We have formerly said that the need to define spiritual beings has led commentators to state, among other things, that when they eat and move, they only apparently do so. I mean, you saw it with your own eyes, but someone whispers, "No, you didn't see a thing. Move on." We'll have a look in chapter 18 of Genesis and judge this alleged appearance, along with other very unusual behaviors when attributed to pure spirits. Abraham is located near the Oaks of Mamre in southern Palestine in a village, along the road linking the north of the country with Hebron. The patriarch is sitting underneath the shade of the tent because it is the hottest hour of the day. He looks up, and there are three men standing before his place. He saw them and ran to meet them at the entrance of the tent. We therefore have a flushed Abraham who, while resting under the shadow of his dwelling, sees three people in front of him and runs to meet them. A very detailed description of a quite normal contextualized situation. When Abraham recognizes the uniqueness of these individuals, he bows down to the ground, calling them "my Lord," Adonai, and asking them to stop over. First, it's hard to imagine that anyone could tell a spiritual vision to stop before proceeding, but there is much more. He tells them he will bring some water to wash their feet and invites them to lie down in the shade of the trees. Clearly, these divine messengers must have seemed dirty, dusty, and hot. They must have had, indeed, the aspect of individuals of flesh and blood who are walking in an almost desert area during the hottest hour of the day. Abraham knows that after resting, one needs to eat, so he offers them some bread that they can consume before continuing. And what do these spiritual beings answer, do, and offer so obvious if made by human beings, but certainly absurd for immaterial entities? I mean, think about it. If they're spirits, I often said, how does a spirit know where the floor is at? What's the difference between a spirit and a ghost? All right. In the text, it says, "You will do so as you said." Okay. A complete expression saying in substance, all right, go ahead. Thus, oddly, these spirits appreciate the chance to freshen their feet and eat before continuing their journey. They were, in fact, aimed toward Sodom, where shortly we will meet them again. There was more than one, and this is also evident by the fact that at some point the group splits up. The supposed leader stops to talk with Abraham while the others continue, for chapter 18, verse 22, to the next destination. After receiving the approval, Abraham orders the servant to prepare much more than what he had hastily offered. He tells him to prepare fresh bread, cook a calf to be eaten with a drink of sour milk and fresh milk, and lays it before them. In short, definitively, a very long break. Despite the preparation time, a stop is necessary to restore tired and hungry bodies. Think about this. Any of you ever butchered your own meat? As a kid, I did. You learn. Chickens, rabbits, cows, calves. So I can tell you this was not done in 30 minutes. It wasn't put in the oven or turned on the microwave. This took a good half a day to just prepare the meat. And why would an angel be eating meat? Kind of blows the whole vegetarian thing, doesn't it? In fact, the narrator states, with an attitude typical of modern journalism that describes an event in detail, that he stood by them underneath the tree, and they ate. The scene recalls Middle Eastern typical nomadism. When an important guest arrives, that guest is offered all comforts and conveniences and consume the meal in tranquility at his prompt position as requires. The whole situation, the accurate detailed description, the timing of the events, particularly the fact that many of them are contemporary, while some things take place, some other things occur, are evidence of a very concrete, real, and material event, including the act of eating, something very difficult to conceive for an angelic, immaterial spiritual beings. And meat. Holy cow. I did not mean to say that. Oh, well, anyway. My apologies to all of our Hindu friends. The angels of Sodom. We've all heard this story. I mean, my goodness, in Sunday school, do they ever, this is the one thing you're going to leave with, besides a few others. We have already seen that after having eaten and rested, two of these individuals continue on their journey while the leader, the Adon Lord, stops to talk with Abraham about Sodom and Gomorrah. Those two were angels, as it says in the first verse of chapter 19. In the night, the two angels arrived in Sodom. Here is background of the narrative's accurateness. It is high noon, and Lot, Abraham's nephew, is sitting near the city gate where the two stop. He recognizes them as belonging to the rank of the Malachims, runs to meet them and bow down at their feet. We thus have further confirmation that it is not spiritual beings, but individuals who walk, take time to get from one place to another, and are seen arriving from afar. Then the one who sees them runs to meet them as a sign of honor and respect. This has nothing to do with the traditions of the sudden and overwhelming apparitions. We are in the presence of a normal process of approaching two people walking quietly in a late and warm Middle Eastern afternoon. Lot offers them the same thing as Abraham did. He wants to host them, giving them the possibility to wash their feet and spend the night in his home. The two, however, decide to do differently and tell Lot, "We will spend the night in the square or in the open place." Lot insists that they join him and enter his house. He bakes unleavened bread and they eat. This is a really strange behavior for these spiritual beings who have discussions, consume the even meal. Remember, they already ate lunch at Abraham's house. So, I guess they didn't have wings. Then consider several opportunities and finally decide where to spend the night. The story continues. As the angels bed down for the night, a frenzied crowd encircles Lot's home and calls for the two guests and demands that Lot hand them over in order to abuse them. By way, can you even think to abuse a spirit? I mean, seriously, folks, I didn't get it for decades. How do you have sex with an angel? Do they have sex organs? Do they suddenly take on form? Yeah. Well, I digress again. Lot refuses and offers in return his two virgin daughters, but the people of Sodom do not listen to reason and try to break down the door to get a hold of the angels. The unfortunate Malachim realize the risky situation, so they take Lot, drags him into the house, and gets rid of the attackers with a very strange action. They were struck with a sudden blindness. That's what the word says. And they struck young and old, that is, everyone. And as the story continues, those men, and they got tired to look for the door. In short, With some system that is not better described, the two Malachms dazzle the people in the crowd, who are then unable to see and are forced to give up trying to break through the door. I don't know. Do we have anything today that modern man can blind people with? Lasers? Just pointing that out. The two then urge Lot to take his family away from the city, stating that they are about to destroy Sodom. The night is over, and at dawn, the two Malachms once more invite Lot to flee with his family because they can no longer wait. The devastation is immediate. Now, let me give you a different perspective. Let's say you have volunteered and you're going to ROTC. Anyone do that? I did. Anyway, so you have a penchant for strategy. So if you're going to attack an enemy, you're going to make your plans ahead of time. This is not going to be spontaneous. This is not in any way going to be a knee-jerk reaction. They used nuclear weapons. Now, we know, as you will see later, it's not what you thought at all. And it's odd that this story is very well told as well in the Hindu religion. All right, the two messengers of the Lord, who we remember stopped at Abraham's to explain to him the reason why they had decided to destroy the city, knowing that time is running out. Tell Lot that the decision has been taken and must be accomplished with no more delays. Then follow the events everyone knows. They flee, the destructions of the cities occurs with the burning sulfur from Yahweh out of the heavens. Could Yahweh been an Elohim? Could it have been Inyel? You know, he doesn't like us. Never has. Just saying. And Lot's wife becomes a pillar of salt, having violated the order not to stop and to look back. So, this is the real story of those events that official religion traditionally interprets as involving spiritual beings. So many incongruities, so many difficulties, so many small daily actions, supposedly meaningless to individuals without a body. Actually, these angels walked, they got tired, and they needed rest. They got dusty and were happy to wash themselves. They were happy to have the ability to eat even twice in the same day, decided where to spend the night, and defended against an aggression by using apparently technological means. These angels, these Malachms, recall the descriptions of the Anunnaki, the Elohims, individuals whose differences from men are evident, who are provided with superior powers, but not omnipotent, who are often vulnerable, attackable, and above all, subject to the normal daily psychological needs. Doesn't sound like any angel to me, floating around, you know? Yeah. This next one is really interesting. And those of you who have studied the Apocrypha, you know this is a very interesting story from the book of Tobit. Many of you will know this character by the book of Nehemiah by Tobias. In this partial list of stories about the angels, the Malachms, we have decided to include the book of Tobit because it is the least known of the Old Testament. This text is part of the Christian Bible, the Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate, but has not been accepted by the Hebrew canon and is considered apocryphal by Protestants. It has survived only in Greek based on the Aramaic version compiled in Judea around 200 BC and got unfortunately lost. In 14 chapters, it describes the story of the Jewish Tobit, and in his son Tobias, sent in 6th, 7th century BC. We must immediately affirm that this writing, the book of Tobit, is full of incongruousness and obvious errors. It blurs the period of the Jews being exiled by the Assyrians. It confuses the name of the Assyrian kings, and it distorts geographical distances. It is no coincidence that the only Catholics consider it a book inspired by God, as they do for all the other texts of the Bible. But since Catholics considered it inspired by God, we want to quote some of the features describing an angel of God, namely the messenger, the Angelos, who accompanies young Tobias during his journey to Medea. Lacking the Hebrew and Aramaic versions, we cannot show the usual literal translation. So we just quote the passages about the angel's characteristics and behavior. This messenger of God is called Raphael, whose name in the Hebrew, Raphael, meaning El God has healed. He himself claims to be one of the 7 angels who have the opportunity to be directly before God, to accompany Tobias on his journey to Rages. However, he uses a different name and chooses to be identified as Ezekiah, the son of Ananias. Let's examine the extracts that concern him, in which this messenger tells Tobias to be an Israelite in search of work. So he lies. Apparently, a lot of these angels and these gods lie in the Old Testament. Claims to be able to guide him on his trip because he has been to Medea and several times and has crossed the plains and mountains and therefore knows the road. Agrees to accompany Tobias and receives compensation of 1 drachma per day. Says that the journey is safe. Wait a minute. So really, this is an angel taken on a human name as a paid guide. Okay. Agrees to accompany Tobias and receive the compensation, says that the journey is safe and they will return safe and sound. At the Tigris River, he tells Tobias to catch a fish that had bitten the boy's foot and teaches him to use the gall, the heart, and liver as drugs to treat seizures and eye diseases. Is responsible for procuring a girl for Tobias to marry and organizes the wedding. Wow, this dude is like a jack of all trades, man. Whoa. Carries out a mission on behalf of Tobias. With 4 servants, he collects some money. Well, I'm glad to see capitalism was alive and well back then. Using the fish gall, he cures Tobias's father's blindness, removing the white spots from his eyes. Well, today we know those are cataracts. Finally, he reveals his true identity as a Lord's messenger and urges Tobias to write down what has happened and then ascends until the onlookers can no longer see him. Recalling what has been said in the opening of this chapter about the Egert's description of the angelic features, we noted that some of them said that the angels only apparently eat. Very likely, their consideration is inspired by the fact that Raphael himself tells Tobias's family that when they saw him eating, in fact, he was not eating anything. Never mind. Move on. Isn't this, I mean, I know some people just will not buy this and will continue, and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to admit, it provides some answers that so many of us have had. I mean, I actually feel good after I read these. It's just, yeah. All right, let's continue. The angel who does not eat earthly food. Talking about angels who refuse to eat earthly food, in the book of Judges, we find the story of an angel, Amalekah, who refuses to eat food prepared for him by the future parents of Samson, to whom he reveals that they are going to have a child destined to be consecrated to the Elohims. When the future father of Samson invites the messenger to stop and get food, the latter tells him, "Even if I stay at your place, I will not eat your food," and invites him to instead offer it to a sacrifice for Yahweh. And after refusing to reveal his name, this Moloch ascends and disappears from their sight, terrifying them. Levitation of a spiritual being, or simply being much more technologically equipped. The Malachite takes off with an aircraft. Let's just stop here a second. Today, although we consider it science fiction, it's rapidly becoming science fact. For the last nearly 50 years, we've grown up with the idea that you can teleport individuals. Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry brought that to our consciousness. I swear, I think that Gene was tapped into the Akashic record, or he knew Enki, one of the two, because this dude, maybe he time traveled back. I don't know. But this, in Ezekiel, is a flying saucer. It is a spacecraft, a big one. And to say that the Anunnaki, right, the gods who created you and me, that they don't have teleportation. Isn't it odd, though, we read about teleportation in the New Testament? Yes, the story of the Master, he teleported himself many times. I know of at least 11 times in the 4 Gospels. Then we have the other apostle, well, not apostle, yeah, I'm not sure, the cat that was on the road that baptized the eunuch from Ethiopia. And I'll think of his name here in a second. Probably someone's already mentioned it. But he's teleported. It says as immediately he was in the next town, which is about 25 miles. Okay. The destroyer, the exterminator. We now have to make a note that will appear as a manifest to the reader who wants to master the information and will read all quoted texts. Malachim's presence often strikes fear and terror. It is rarely appeasing, and many of those who see them believe they will not survive the event. I want to stop here. How many alien abductions have been talked about where the people were in stark terror of these beings? So we are very far from the poetic version, kindly describing angels as beings of light, always positive apparitions, entities that always and in any case protect those who are entrusted to them. By contrast, they are often convey messages of death. And when death is evaded, they are responsible for events that produce destruction and great suffering. These are figures that men would be better off not meeting. In this regard, we will end this chapter by introducing the figure of the exterminating or destroying angel, the angel of Egypt. It is called destroyer, exterminator. For the first time in Exodus 12:23, the scene is set in Egypt, and the Jews are about to leave the country and move towards the promised land. The exterminator, the destroyer, the Mishit, has mandated to hit and kill all Egyptian firstborns, sparing Jews' homes distinguished by the lamb's blood. Actually, the text does not allow understanding exactly whether this exterminator is sent by Yahweh or is Yahweh himself. But the author of the epistle to the Hebrews, included in the New Testament, already recalls the episode and describes this figure as a Olarium, and I probably screwed that up, the destroyer. I want to stop here because tonight my show on the Artist First Network, I'm going to give the audience there we're going to go and look at the Colburn. And you know what, folks? Again, I may not have a formal education, but I'm smart enough, as you are, to start connecting the dots. How can the Egyptian scribes, the priest who wrote in the Qumran, call this thing the destroyer? And yet we see the very similar term used by the Hebrews. I think this guy is in error when he says Jews, but that's okay. Folks, some will see, some will not. All right, the siege of Sennacherib. The second intervention of this Malachah is described in the second book of Kings that tells us about the siege of Jerusalem by the Sennacherib, who were in 701 BC, and the Assyrian king is waging his campaign to conquest over the territories of Palestine. Now, the biblical text says in 2 Kings 19:35, that night the Malachah of Yahweh went out and put to death 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. Sucks if you are really on the wrong side of this dude, man. It seems that on this occasion, the angel made use of an infestation of mice. Did you know that? As confirmed by the Greek historian Herodotus in Chronicles 2:141, who tells of a very similar event happened to the army of Sodom during the siege. Rats gnawed the quivers, the bowstrings, the leather shields, handles, thus disarming the military force. Many fell. So we have to ask ourselves, was this an angel or was this actually a battle? Did the rats carry disease? Did the plague on Israel? A third intervention of this exterminating angel is narrated in the second book of Samuel. That in chapter 24 describes a census ordered by King David. We all know that. The census, however, was an act contrary to the Elohim's will, who therefore hits the people with the plague. I'll tell you what. Woof. I mean, would you marry someone like this? Would you date someone like this? Would you fall in love with someone like this? You'd live in perpetual terror, which the Israelites did. That's why they got rid of it. Yeah, we're going to find that out as well. The text says, with the same journalistic accuracy, we have already noted elsewhere that it was the time of the barley harvest and that 70,000 men died in the territory between Dan and Beersheba. The angel then stretches out his hands towards Jerusalem to devastate it. But Yahweh feels pity for the people and orders the angel, the Malachah, to stop. The important fact is that up until this point, we may think that the story is about a figurative representation of God's will, a sort of personification of his will. But the verse 16 contains a surprising clarification. And the messenger of Yahweh was at the yard of Araunah, the Jebusite. Suddenly, then a story that could be read as a symbolic representation becomes concrete and precisely located in a common, unremarkable place, devoid of any value. The angel is in the barnyard. We also know that this yard is located on Mount Moriah, overlooking the ancient Jebusite settlement, which would later develop and what? Become the city of Jerusalem, the capital of the kingdom of David. Indeed, the story continues saying that David saw the Malachah and in the act of hitting the people and asked God to spare him, since he was not to blame for the census. He and his families, in fact, were the responsible ones. So, whoa, let's just stop here. This angel is beating the crap out of this guy. Seriously. Thus, the king of Israel receives the order to erect an altar and in that barnyard, and the historicity of the story goes on to describe David's ascending Mount Moriah, accompanied by counselors, the guy there, the landowner, and leans over and sees and joins the parade. David buys the land and the animals for 50 silver shekels and builds the altar as he has been ordered, and the scourges cease. The story is also narrated in the first book of Chronicles that even adds some details. The Malach, the angel, stood by the barnyard of Anuruh, the Jebusite. David looks up and sees him standing between earth and sky. When David goes to Anuruh, he was at the thrashing of the wheat. And if you know what that looks like, you got a wheel that goes and crushes it, and then you have anyway. I digress. And sees him and the angel. And Anuruh's children are terrified. They're hiding while the farmer approaches David. The last verse of chapter 21 tells and affirms that after these events, David wanted to consult Yahweh in his home on the hill of Gibeon, but did not dare go there because he was still terrified by the sight of the angel. Brief and concrete conclusion. So we find real, tangible, concrete descriptions, not only within the detailed scene narrative, but also on the contextualization of the events period, in the geographical and space location, and also within the description of the psychological aftermaths which persist through time. Once again, we find that the Malachim and the Anunnakis are definitely similar. Wow. Well, there you go. What do y'all think about that? I told you this is fascinating. So there we go. A different take on angels. I'm going to be curious to see what we begin to find out on demons. I have this theory, as I've told you before. I believe the Anunnaki that were here working in the mines who had signed on for this trip. I mean, seriously, this was an intelligent, and by the way, I want to explain to someone, they said, well, how could this Nima had done this genetic detailed experiment? They had computers, folks. We're not the only ones to have them. Obviously, they had computers. But here we go. I think these Anunnaki signed on different times. They knew it was going to be a long cycle. Sure, they had bonuses, just like in the movie Aliens. You go and mine a distant planet or moon. And the ones that died here, I think they're trapped. Unless they're gods, whoever their gods are. We don't know who their gods are. We don't know who Anu worships or answers to. I think we may have a clue in Psalms 82, gives a little insight that there is a supreme, above man's concept of God. And I tell everyone this. If you have a concept of God, then that's not God. God is above a concept. And God is not masculine. I doubt if it's feminine. I doubt if it's anything. If anything, it would be pure thought. Non-corporeal, non-material. It would be pure energy. Everything else, we're just dancing. We're like Pinocchio, you know? And so these Anunnaki are pissed. That's why they torment man. And their offspring are pissed. That's why they torment man. And it may be that they're waiting to kick some butt themselves. If indeed Inyel or Enki is in fact, I have a thought that I think Yahweh may be dead. We know he left. We know that because Solomon gives record of that, and this is what we're going to find in the next chapter. Yahweh left. We know these Elohims have a lifespan. We don't know how long. Could be hundreds of thousands of years. Who knows? Maybe millions. They do die, though. So did Yahweh's bloodline carry on? As we found out yesterday, Yahweh had a wife, Ashereth. So we have to include that into the scene. Were there offspring left here? Were they basically put as the guardians? Is this what we interpret Michael to be? Is this what we interpret Gabriel to be? Bad mothers. You don't want to mess with them. Do I believe they exist? Yes, I do. I just don't think that they're angels in the sense that, that it's been put in the modern religiosity of the context. But it's something to consider. Well, there we go, folks. Another exciting hour. I just want to thank all of you for being in here. I didn't see anything in the, I go back and I read them later. Eternal, yeah. They think they could be the blue gods. I asked yesterday, what color are the Anunnaki? I don't think they're Caucasian. I don't think they're black. I think that they would be, with their sun, the way that they would be of a total different pigment. And I think that this white star that is here instead of the yellow one, and who knows what the sun was back then. We know it has 5 different colors that it has gone through. And maybe that's what the Anunnaki are waiting for, our sun to shift colors again. Who knows? So, well, hello from Brazil. Angelo, how are you? Good to see you. This has been a good man. He's followed me for a long time. And I know I have a large following down in Brazil, a large Portuguese speaking group. So thank you. Hey, you're welcome, Brian. I appreciate you as well. So I'm going to go ahead and end this. I respect your time. Thank you. I appreciate the emails and the comments. Good ones. Yeah, I got feelings. No one likes it. And I'm not lost, but who knows? Maybe I am. But if I'm lost, I'm having fun. But you see, my quest is for the unknown. So, all right, folks, be good to yourself. I'll see you tomorrow. Jeff Doherty, tomorrow night, Friday Night Live. I will come back on tomorrow. We've got to get the part about God in here, the Yahweh. I think that'd be a great way to end the week. And then following that up with Jeff Doherty on Friday Night Live, I think will be just the topper of it. All right, folks, appreciate you all. Be good to yourselves. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.